Hello and welcome to KAUST Live. We have a special session today. Daniele Daffonchio has joined us, and he's just back from COP23, so we're going to talk to him a little bit about his research and about the time he spent in Bonn, Germany. So Daniele, thank you for joining us. Let's start off with your work in general at KAUST. Tell us a little bit about your position here and the work that you do.
Thank you, Nicholas. I am a professor here at KAUST since now 3 years and a half, a bit more than 3 years and a half. And I'm working on, my specialization is in environmental microbiology. And actually the idea is to investigate the microbiomes, so the ensemble of microbes, as links between the different compartments of the environment, including the organism. So we are looking from the continuity of the microbiomes from the desert to the Red Sea. And in particular, we are focusing, at least what I reported in COP is some of our research, and in general the research that is done here at KAUST on the intertidal ecosystems, the mangrove ecosystems in particular, and how the microbiomes connect the different components of the ecosystem, the plants, the animals, the sediments, and the water, of course, the seawater.
Right. And so most of your work is based more in extreme environments, either in the desert rhizospheres or in the mangrove. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes, this is in general here is a very extreme environment. There are only extreme environments, let's say, because and it is the beauty of this place because it's a natural laboratory where we can investigate the response of the microorganism and of course of the other organisms the microorganisms are interacting with, like the plants, for instance, in the desert, or the plants at the fringe zone between the land and the sea that are the mangroves, for instance. So actually we are interested to understand how the extreme conditions, so the high salinity, high temperature, and low oxygen availability or changing concentration of oxygen affect the functioning of all these organisms and how the microbes can connect them and how the microbes can help. The microbes can help in boosting the life of these organisms.
Right.
So
it's a symbiotic relationship.
It's a symbiotic relationship, yes, definitely.
And so for most of us, a microbiome or these little organisms, what size are we talking about? What's the complexity of these organisms?
Of course, the microorganisms, like the word says, at micro scale, so micron scale, and they are forming a relationship. So they are attaching, they are growing as a biofilm, as carpets of cells over surfaces of the different organisms, like the roots of the plants, for instance. They can colonize the rhizoplane, what is the surface of the root, but they can also enter the tissues of the organism, where they can help in providing, let's say, ecological functional services, like, for instance, in the case of the plant, producing nutrients, releasing nitrogen, making available phosphorus or iron when it is deficient in particular, or they can also affect the hormone pathway and the hormone balance of the organism, so modifying somehow the response to the stresses. And we are doing this kind of research in plants. At the moment, we are working both on wild plants like the mangroves, or in the desert the spear grasses that grow in the sand. But we are also investigating the role of these microorganisms on crops, how they can help by colonizing the root in resisting, making the plant resistant or resilient to drought stress or salinity stress, but especially we are interested in drought, so the lack of water.
So for non-sea dwelling plants or plants that are outside of this close to the coastal zone, do they have similar relationships with microorganisms as well?
Yes, we speak now about an holobiome, so it's not just the plant, the animal, or the different organisms, but they are together with millions, if not billions, of microbial cells. So these microorganisms colonize the different compartments of the plant, from the root to the shoot, to the leaves, but especially in the root they play a very, very interesting role in promoting the growth, in making the plant resistant to the stress. And the same we are investigating in the animals, especially the animals that live in the mangrove ecosystem, like the crabs, that are really hundreds, can be up to hundreds per square meter of sediment. So this means that they make a very strong activity, and the microbes help a lot in coping with the different stresses that are occurring here.
Oh, I see. So they have relationships with the crabs as well as
Yes,
plants.
yes.
Interesting. Yeah.
And any organism, higher organism than microbes, I mean, should interact, just for the size of the microbes, with a lot of different microbes. And they established, evolutionary speaking, very positive interaction. Of course, there are also the pathogenic interactions, so microbes that are negative, but we are interested on those that provide a real good service, I mean, a positive effect.
Right, right.
And understanding how they work, and eventually exploit them.
So it could be translated exactly. That was going to be my next question. Do these help? So there's been a lot of talk about the blue carbon economy. Do these help in some way to fixate carbon in particular? Is that part of the processing?
Of course, definitely the microbes, because the blue carbon, the concept of blue carbon is that the carbon that is fixed by the plants is then deposited in the sediments and in the subsurface. I mean, and so is not made any more available to interact with oxygen and to be further metabolized and released again as a gas like CO2 or methane. So actually we are trying to understand how the microbes help in this fixation and what is the turnover of this carbon that the microbes determine in the sediments, both at the level of the plant and at the level of the animal, because these animals, the crabs, but there are the shrimps, the ghost shrimps, or many others that are burrowers. So they spend a part of their life in within the sediment, and so they deposit carbon. They pick up leaves and material and put down in the sediment.
So they also help fix that carbon in a way.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes, they have for sure a contribution on the cycle of this carbon.
Now you, I believe, came to KAUST. Part of the reason was you had a collaboration with Herbert Hurt working on the desert rhizosphere. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We started a collaboration with Heribert, and then we continued with my own laboratory. And exactly, the idea was to understand first the ecology of the interaction between the plant and the microbes. So what are the factors that determine the type of microbes and their functionality in the root system, and in general at the interface between the root and the soil, the sand. And then another work we are doing now, we are also collaborating with a new faculty here, that is Professor Ikram Blilou, on how these microbes can help the plant and can modulate different activities in the plant. In particular with Ikram, Professor Blilou, we are working on the date palm. That is a very important crop here in this country and in general in the Middle East.
And any findings from that yet, or is that just still in its infant stage?
Yes, actually we are studying some strains, some bacterial strains that we have shown that in condition of greenhouse cultivation, they can improve the resistance to water stress. So if we decrease the amount of water for irrigation and the roots of the date palm is properly colonized by these bacteria, the plant can resist and still produce enough biomass and grow in an appropriate way. I mean, grow properly. Right. So this means that the bacteria can really play a role. Now we are trying to understand, together with the colleagues, uh, what is the mechanistic
Yes.
interaction. So how the microbes do transfer this capacity to the plant and what they activate in the plant to respond.
How does it make it more efficient with the water that it does have?
That would be very important because, of course, the plant cannot cope. The microbes are not, do not substitute water.
Right.
Water is necessary. By definition, the irrigation is necessary, but they can help in saving some of the water. This is our assumption, our hypothesis,
Right.
and actually it seems that it is like that. We are now trying to move to verify the experiment in the real field condition, so under the sun and the heat that is occurring here.
Right, right. So you were in Bonn, Germany for COP23. Tell me about what you did when you were there, what you presented in particular from your research.
I was in particular invited to talk to one of the many side events that were organized there. In particular, this was an event, a space assigned to Saudi Arabia, to the country, to present the initiatives that the country is doing to preserve the environment and, of course, to cope with the climate change challenges that especially are really important. And so actually I provided some of the research we are doing, myself together with other colleagues, including, for instance, Professor Carlos Duarte. We are collaborating to understand how the plant and the microorganisms cooperate and what is the role of the animals that graze in the mangrove stand, how all this ensemble of organisms guarantee the sustainability of the system. This is the northernmost area where mangrove can grow.
You mean this area here?
Yes, in the Red Sea.
Really?
And yes, because the biggest forest of mangroves are in at the equator latitudes, around the equators. And then as soon as you move north or south, of course the conditions, the condition became more challenging for the plants. And the northernmost distribution in this longitude for the mangroves is here in the Red Sea up to the middle north part of the Red Sea. And so the plants in this condition are really challenged, especially here in the Red Sea because there is a strong salinity. And actually we want to understand how this, the interaction between the plant and the animal by the way of the microbes, the microorganisms that live together with all these hosts, can really interact to positively sustain the system.
Yeah. Do you think
and
it's...
at COP, I presented some of the activity that we have done here that if you want I can...
yeah, no, please do. Please.
For instance, actually I showed some work that has been done here in KAUST by the colleague Carlos Duarte on the mapping of the mangrove Red Sea, of the Red Sea mangroves. So for instance, it was discovered that contrary to the many other areas in the world, the surface area of the mangroves in the Red Sea is slightly increased in the last 30 years or more. So this means that while in the other part of the world there is a declining of the surface area, here is somehow protected. So there were a lot of effort by the countries on the Red Sea, especially by Saudi Arabia, in new plantation to counteract the losses of surface area determined by the urbanization of the coast and the grazing of animals, camels for instance, or by the industrialization, the industrial poles, etc. And that was one of the things that was a major finding. Other findings, of course, are on the measure of the blue carbon accumulation and losses. What is the turnover of blue carbon in this ecosystems. And then, for instance, another important issue is the effect that these intertidal ecosystems, like not only mangroves but seagrasses as well, determine on the elevation of the sediment. That is, so in few words, where there are all these, let's say, plants, they determine accumulation of sediment, so the elevation, the progressive elevation of the sediment, that is extremely important for the protection, the physical protection of the coast from, the erosion, the tide, the waves, and so on. And we discovered that even here, in this extreme condition, seagrasses can help in elevating for some like 2 centimeters per year, where we measured the sediment, so protecting the coast. While where there are not the seagrasses, there is a decrease of the elevation, so the coast became more vulnerable just for the erosion. And then I like to talk about a very important initiative started recently at KAUST this year in March, that is a field research station at the King Abdullah Monument that is called IBSINA, Field Research Station and Marine Protection Area. That is, let's say, an area of many hectares where there are mangroves that is allocated to be protected first, and then can be used to make monitoring research. And in fact, we installed in that place several sensors to measure what are the conditions and how they change during time at the different seasons of the year. And also we established plots of both juvenile and mature mangroves to see how they behave, how they develop over time, and how the presence of the animals that graze there determine the growth and affect the growth. And also, of course, that is my passion, the role of the microbes, the microorganisms, that connect all these systems, the sediment, the plant, and the animals that graze there.
Well, it makes me think, what is the effect when you try to transplant the plants? It must radically change the composition of the ground, and it seems like it would have a great effect on whether it's successful or not, whether you bring the right microbiome with you. Talk a little bit about that.
Let's say the concept is that whenever you put an organism in a place, this organism, like a plant for instance, start to interact with the microbes that are naturally there. And make a sort of selection. So there is a dialogue between the plant and the microbes, and then the plants start to produce some resources that are used to fish the microbes. So the microbes are attracted by these resources released by the roots.
Selecting for the ones that are helpful.
And so the microbes are selected, positively selected. And then there is a perturbation made by the root, because the root make burrows, explore the sediment, so allow the oxygenation of the sediment, and the same effect is determined by the animals that go there to graze over these resources that are released by the plant. And so these animals also make burrows, and so make an aeration of the sediment, and this change completely the geochemical condition of the sediment, determining changes in the carbon turnover, nitrogen turnover. For instance, one thing could be that, of course, the organic carbon can be metabolized more quickly due to the oxygen, but for instance, the introduction of oxygen limits the release of methane. The biological produced methane, and the methane is also a very important greenhouse gas, even more than CO2, because it's, I think, 4 times higher greenhouse power than the CO2. So, in few words, all these, as biocenosis determine a change of the condition that in general, according to our data and the data published in the literature, determine an improvement of the condition and a better resilience and functioning, a lot of positive functioning, including nesting for animals, for birds, for instance, that use the trees, but also for fishes, marine animals that have recovery there, make mating sites where they can reproduce, the elevation of the sediment to protect the coast, and so on. So a lot of positive effects. So these coastal environments are really very, very important and should be preserved, especially here, especially in countries that are really challenged by the general harsh climate, harsh environmental conditions.
Right. Have there been successful projects that your team or KAUST in general have been involved in to expand the mangrove along the coast here?
Okay, we did not at the moment, at least myself, my team, did not at the moment propose any project of expanding, because we are more dealing with the research, understanding how the system works and give proof of principle if something can work. But of course, this should be a decision that should be taken by the higher level. Then we provide research. Right. What we can say is that the findings we are providing, we're getting, provide new information, very important to make decision then. That on how to protect the coast, how to manage the ecosystem, how to improve in general the natural setting in the coastal environment of the Red Sea.
Very good. So then, what do you see for the future of your research? What's the new stuff that's coming for you?
Let's say the new stuff is indeed the continuity of the microbiomes, because let's say as for the mangrove forest, there are 2 species of plants in the Red Sea, and in most of the coast is 1 species, that is Avicennia marina. But microbes are thousands of species per gram of sediment, per gram of soil. So try to imagine the complex interaction that occur there. Now, fortunately, the technology is helping us, because with the new DNA barcoding technology and the new DNA sequencing technology, we can easily understand and monitor all this diversity, this complex diversity. But still a lot of work, and what I see as for the future is to understand the functional interaction between the host, the plants, the sediment that host all the system, the animals, and these microbes, and how the microbes connect one with the other, because the microbes, of course, can be moved, transported, moved by the water, by the tide, by the water current, by the animals that graze and pick up material and move here and there. And so this should be understood how these microbes, with their movement, affect the function. That is the most important thing, the future.
So coming away from COP23, what was your sense of at least the sessions that you were involved in? How are things progressing?
Actually, there were in the session several talks from colleagues from other institutions here in Saudi Arabia, from PERCSA, for instance, from Saudi Aramco, and I could really perceive that a lot of initiatives, both in terms of research and in terms of applied investment on the coastal environments, are done. And for instance, I learned that there is a big mangrove park project on the Gulf, on the Arabian Gulf, that is led by Aramco, that is indeed investing in creating, and is already created and is developed, this big park that is, of course, a system for the protection of the coast, for the preservation of the organism, but also for letting the people know, because I understand, I know that they are planning to have visitors that can make a path along this park to see what is the beauty of this nature, of this mangrove forest. And so I realized that all these initiatives are really providing a new view on how the system, even in this harsh condition of the Red Sea and the Arabian Gulf, can be maintained and preserved. Of course, a lot of work should be further implemented, but this is a wonderful scenario at the moment that's happening.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming in and speaking with us, and welcome back to the kingdom after your trip.
Yes.
And thank you to everyone on Facebook for joining us. If you want to learn more about Professor Daffonchio's research, you can go to discovery.kaust.edu.sa. There's quite a bit there on his work. Thank you, and take good care.